The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Courtroom 7, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge Maria Thompson, a distinguished black woman in her 50s, adjusted her robes as she took her seat behind the imposing bench. Her dark eyes surveyed the packed courtroom with quiet authority. Every seat was filled. Reporters clutched their notepads, cameras ready. Community leaders sat shoulder to shoulder with concerned citizens. The air buzzed with tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. At the defendant's table sat Officer Jake Miller, a burly white man with cold blue eyes and clenched fists. His uniform had been replaced by an ill-fitting gray suit, but his arrogance remained unchanged. This was his day of reckoning. "The people versus Officer Jake Miller," Judge Thompson announced, her voice carrying across the silent room. "Charges of assault, battery, and civil rights violations." Miller's jaw tightened. Over the past 5 years, 17 complaints had been filed against him. 17 black men and women who claimed he had abused his power. Today, justice would finally have its say. The bailiff, Tom Jackson, stood at attention, his hand resting near his weapon. Something felt different about this case. Something dangerous. Prosecutor Sarah Davis called her first witness. The state calls Carlos Washington to the stand. A young black man in his 20s walked forward, his hands trembling slightly. Carlos had been Miller's most recent victim, pulled over for driving suspiciously in his own neighborhood. "Tell us what happened that night, Carlos," Davis said gently. Carlos cleared his throat. "Officer Miller pulled me over on Maple Street. I was coming home from work at the hospital. He yanked me out of my car, threw me against the hood, and called me." Carlos paused, looking directly at Miller. "He called me names I won't repeat in court." Miller's face reddened. He whispered something harsh to his defense attorney, Robert Hayes. Davis presented video evidence next. Body camera footage from multiple incidents played on the courtroom screens. The pattern was clear, undeniable. Miller targeting black drivers, using excessive force, hurling racial slurs. "That's 15 documented cases of misconduct," Davis stated firmly. Miller slammed his fist on the table. "This is garbage. These people are lying. Mr. Miller." Judge Thompson's voice cut through the outburst. "Control yourself or you'll be held in contempt." Defense attorney Hayes stood nervously. "Your Honor, my client has served this community for 12 years. These are isolated incidents, taken out of context." "Isolated?" Davis fired back. 15 victims. 17 complaints. A clear pattern of racial targeting. Miller's breathing grew heavy. His eyes darted around the courtroom, lingering on the black faces watching him. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Hayes fumbled through his notes. Officer Miller was simply doing his job, maintaining law and order in difficult circumstances. The weak defense fell flat. Everyone could see the truth unfolding before their eyes. The jury foreman, an elderly black man named Robert Clark, stood slowly. The entire courtroom held its breath. "On the charge of assault and battery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations, we find the defendant guilty." The words hit Miller like lightning. His face twisted with rage, veins bulging in his neck. "No. No. This is not happening." Judge Thompson raised her gavel. "Mr. Miller, you are hereby sentenced to shut up." Miller roared, jumping to his feet. "I won't take orders from some black." In one swift motion, Miller reached inside his jacket. The metallic glint of a pistol flashed under the courtroom lights. Gasps echoed through the room as he raised the weapon, pointing it directly at Judge Thompson's chest. "You think you can destroy my life?" Miller screamed, his finger on the trigger. "You people don't belong on that bench." Chaos erupted. People dove under benches, children cried, reporters scrambled for cover. Bailiff Jackson moved toward Miller, but the officer spun the gun toward him. "Stay back. Everyone stay back." Judge Thompson remained perfectly still. Her hands rested calmly on her desk, her eyes locked on Miller's face. No fear. No trembling. Just quiet strength. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Lower your weapon." I said, "Shut up. You can point that gun at me all you want," Judge Thompson continued, her voice growing stronger. "But you cannot silence justice. You cannot silence truth. You cannot silence the voices of 17 people whose lives you damaged." Miller's hand shook. Sweat poured down his face. "Look around this courtroom, Officer Miller. Look at these faces. Black, white, brown. All here for the same reason. All here because they believe justice matters more than hate." The crowd behind Miller began to stand. One by one, Carlos Washington rose. Then Robert Clark. Then Sarah Davis. Then dozens more, creating a wall of unity. "You are outnumbered, Officer Miller. Not by guns or badges, but by people who refuse to live in fear." Miller's breathing became ragged. His weapon wavered as he realized something terrifying. He was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Judge Thompson's calm demeanor suddenly made sense. She pressed a small button hidden beneath her bench. "What you don't know, Officer Miller, is that this courtroom was recently upgraded with advanced security technology." A low hum filled the air. Miller's gun began to vibrate in his hand, growing hot to the touch. His eyes widened in confusion and panic. "Electromagnetic pulse system," Bailiff Jackson announced, stepping forward with confidence. "Your weapon has been completely disabled." Miller squeezed the trigger desperately. Nothing. Click. 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 The gun was dead metal in his trembling fingers. "That's impossible!" Miller screamed, shaking the useless weapon. "Technology designed to protect justice from people like you," Judge Thompson said, standing tall behind her bench, but the real surprise came from behind Miller. Carlos Washington stepped into the aisle, no longer the frightened victim from earlier. His shoulders were squared, his voice strong. "We're not afraid of you anymore, Miller." Robert Clark, the jury foreman, joined him. Then Sarah Davis. Then the court reporter. One by one, ordinary citizens formed a circle around the disarmed officer. "You spent years terrorizing our community," Carlos continued. "Making us feel small, powerless, afraid to drive our own streets." Miller spun around wildly, clutching his dead weapon. "Get away from me. All of you." "No," said a young mother holding her son's hand. "We won't run anymore." Bailiff Jackson moved with practiced precision. Years of training kicked in as he approached Miller from behind. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Miller's wrist, twisted the useless gun away, and forced the former officer to his knees. "Jake Miller, you are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, terrorist threats, and contempt of court." The courtroom erupted in applause. Not celebration of violence, but celebration of courage. The community had faced its demon and won. Miller knelt on the courtroom floor, finally powerless. His hate had been no match for their unity. His weapon had been no match for their preparation. His fear had been no match for their hope. Justice was not just served. It was protected, defended, and secured for everyone. Bailiff Jackson snapped the handcuffs around Miller's wrists with a satisfying click. Additional charges include brandishing a weapon in court, threatening a federal judge, and attempted intimidation of witnesses. Miller was dragged to his feet, his face pale with shock. The man who had terrorized so many was now just another criminal in custody. Judge Thompson straightened her robes and addressed the packed courtroom. Her voice rang with authority and hope. "Today we witnessed something powerful. Not just the conviction of one corrupt officer, but the courage of an entire community. You stood up when it mattered most. You chose unity over division, bravery over fear." The crowd listened in respectful silence. Justice is not something that happens to us. Justice is something we create together. Every time we speak up against wrong, every time we support each other, every time we refuse to let hate win, we build a stronger foundation for tomorrow. Applause filled the courtroom. Carlos Washington wiped tears from his eyes. Robert Clark nodded with satisfaction. Children who had hidden under benches now stood tall beside their parents. This courtroom belongs to all of us, Judge Thompson concluded. Black, white, brown, every color, every background. This is what justice looks like when good people refuse to stay silent. As Miller was led away in chains, the community remained standing. They had faced their biggest fear and won. The battle against racism wasn't over, but today, hope had triumphed. Today, justice belonged to everyone.